Welcome to Her Own Boss, the podcast created by graduates to help young women find their inner entrepreneur. Today I'm joined by one of our expert mentors, Charlie Munro. Charlie did her degree in economics at Bath University and is currently Vice President of Propositions for Barclays Ventures, where she builds, incubates and invests in projects which solve important intergenerational issues. In her previous job, Charlie gained loads of experience working with startups and entrepreneurs by supporting them through their first few years of business. She's also had her fair share of side hustles, competing in global innovation labs hosted by the UN and working with the Circle of Entrepreneurs to help young people combine their day jobs with startup innovation. Charlie will be drawing on all of this experience to help us answer a question many young people have. How do I present myself with confidence? Hi, Charlie.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on to kind of share some of your expertise and knowledge with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Very excited to be a part of it.
So in our first episode, I spoke to Kate Bache, who's the founder of two companies. And something she brought up was that when she started her first business, the thing that still challenged her confidence was having to pitch her ideas. But could you clarify what it means to pitch? It kind of sounds like a buzzword you'd hear on Dragon's Den, but is it possible our listeners will have had experience pitching?
Pitching is just a word that we use for presenting yourself, presenting your ideas. We use it obviously a lot in a corporate environment. Like you say, pitching tends to be associated with something like a Dragon's Den when you're pitching your new business idea. But really any sort of, presentation is, falls into that kind of category.
Yeah, thank you. So it's just, presenting yourself, and I guess these are skills that you can use even if you don't go into entrepreneurship just in university or in your own job.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, how do I present myself with confidence?
Good question. So there's kind of three main things that I wanted to touch on today when you sort of invited me to talk about this particular topic, which really resonated with me because I absolutely still to this day get really nervous and scared before I have to go into any kind of formal pitching or presenting environment. I have weekly, if not daily, meetings with people in the business. And I still get nervous too. So it was something that I really wanted to try and see if my experiences could help some of your listeners. And there's kind of three main tips or myth busters that I sort of wanted to talk about today. So I guess that kind of leads me into my first tip, which is that it's okay to be nervous. Even just kind of realizing this and understanding this helped me to build my confidence. I recently heard on a podcast that 85% of people admit to being nervous before public speaking. And to be honest, I think the other 15% might not be telling the truth. As I kind of mentioned, I'm still really nervous about presenting, which actually surprises people. I'd say I'm quite sort of extrovert, and in sort of everyday life, I'm definitely not shy, but there is just something about that sort of formal setting of an important meeting or presentation that sort of sends shivers down my spine. So, you're never alone in that feeling. I think that we, or at least I, put a lot of pressure on myself to be really perfect, come across in a way that's sort of clear, intelligent, to articulate everything perfectly, wanting to be that person when you walk out of the room and everyone goes, wow, wasn't she amazing? But to be honest, the pressure we put on ourselves isn't helpful or really healthy. And I just think for me, it always helps to remember that 9 times out of 10, you know far more about what you're talking about than the people that you're talking to. And also, most of the time, probably 9 times out of 10, the people that you're talking to are there to learn. They're genuinely interested, which is why they're there. They want to ask you questions and encourage you to do well, not to criticize or shoot you down. So I guess, how do you make sure that you know more than anyone else in the room? And that's really to do your homework, which sort of leads me quite nicely into my second tip, or at least the thing I wish I'd been told earlier, which is to be prepared. I cannot emphasize enough the value of being prepared for any kind of presentation that you might be doing, whether that's at university or work or any other environment, and the impact that it would have on any of your nerves. I used to sort of watch presentations and meetings or at conferences and be really amazed by how some people can present for so long in such a sort of logical, confident, relaxed way. They didn't have any notes, sometimes not even any slides. And they made it seem as if it was all just coming out from the top of their heads. And I really wanted to be able to do that. I used to go into presentations massively underprepared and just sort of expect all the right words to kind of flow out of my mouth once I got going. But to be honest, that never really happened. And I would just completely freeze and get really embarrassed. And I quite quickly realized this was something that I needed to improve upon, because it's such a fundamental and important part of what I do in my life and in my job at the moment. So an area for improvement, definitely. And it actually wasn't until kind of a couple of years ago, and I was chatting to one of my girlfriends about wanting to improve my presentation skills, and we started talking about how we could be more like some of these amazing speakers, almost as if they're reading off of a script. And it sounds probably a bit ridiculous and obvious to you and to the listeners, but for me it was honestly one of those kind of light bulb moments, that it can almost guarantee you that when you think someone is a naturally good presenter, it's probably because they have practiced and practiced and practiced and probably done the presentation hundreds of times before you hear them do it, especially if it's an investor pitch. I once heard that you're allowed to, when you're doing a TED talk, they make sure you can say your presentation perfectly in double speed and also backwards.
Oh my God.
So people are quite literally rehearsing their TED talk in their sleep before they're allowed to go on stage. So it's okay and not embarrassing to practice. What works for me, I've started writing myself scripts. So I literally open a blank Word document and I start typing as if I was speaking it. You never take this into the presentation with you, but you can quite quickly and easily collect your thoughts. It's a really good way of arranging them into a really logical order. And obviously over time, you can sort of practice and condense them down until you've perfected it, until it comes across really naturally, just like all of those presenters that you have kind of envied. So yeah, nothing beats nerves like going into a presentation knowing your stuff. And the third thing that I really wanted to talk about today the third tip I wanted to talk about today is really just to put yourself out there. As I mentioned at the start, I used to be petrified at the thought of presenting, but I've always been the first person to volunteer, put myself forward for presentations whenever there's an opportunity. I truly believe that the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll start to feel, or at least you sort of learn to become more accustomed to those butterflies in your tummy before you get out there. I could quite easily and quite happily sit there and not contribute in some of the meetings that I still go into today. But by putting myself out there in a position where I'm going to have to present, taking myself out of my comfort zone, sort of forcing myself to find that confidence and the courage to voice my opinion. I do have to remind myself that I have got, a lot of value to offer in these meetings and insightful things to say. And, sometimes you just need a little reminder or encouragement. But once you tell yourself that, put yourself out there, I promise you will feel so proud of yourself for doing it, even if it doesn't go perfectly. But the more you can do that, please put yourself out there and get practicing at every opportunity.
That's awesome. I think those tips are so good. And I'm so surprised to hear that you're nervous when you're presenting, because I've heard you present before and give workshops, and you honestly come across as so confident and kind of well prepared and put together. So whatever you're doing is working.
Well, thank you. I think fake it till you make it. I think that's what they say.
Oh, definitely. I think that's my life motto.
So just to kind of sort of summarize all of those points. So
Yeah.
kind of tip number one, or mythbuster number one, is that it's okay to be nervous. I can't promise that your nerves will ever go away. They certainly haven't for me. But just recognizing that it's a totally normal thing to feel. You just need to try and channel that energy into something positive. For me, it's the motivation to put in the work that I need to do to go into the meeting prepared. The second is be prepared. So nothing calms your nerves more than being prepared. For me, that's literally writing out a script. For you, it might be something else. Never, ever feel like you have to memorize your presentation. Never be shy about taking your notes into the presentation with you. I have seen so many amazing speakers who are holding or reading from a script. Do whatever you can to make yourself feel more relaxed and confident going into it. And then finally, put yourself out there. Even if it feels uncomfortable, volunteer to present as much as you can, get yourself used to the environment, and always ask for feedback. What could you have done better, differently, but also what was good, what worked, and what went really well. And you'll get some really useful insights.
I think feedback is such a good point as well, because I'm sure you always do a lot better than you think you've done. So it's always good to get that positive feedback after a scary and nervous experience.
Absolutely. So the final thing that I thought it might be useful to talk about is how you might structure your presentation. So this is more specific to those of you who are looking to create or present investor pitches about new businesses, which is one of the areas that I focus on in my role at the moment. So have some sort of expertise and experience here. I'm not sure we're going to have time for it in today's episode, so maybe we could come back in a few months and do a separate session with you. But one of the frameworks that I found really invaluable since I learned it is the power of using the why and then the what. Some of you may already be familiar with it. It was actually the first TED Talk I ever watched. It's by Simon Sinek. It's called Start With Why. I think there's also a book as well. I won't sort of steal his thunder because I highly recommend that you watch it, but he talks about how you should connect with people on an emotional level first and engage them on the why before you start talking to them about the what. So he uses some classic examples like the power of Apple's marketing versus the Dell computer and some other really interesting sort of real life examples. So would highly recommend you watch that one, but maybe we could come back to that on a future episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually recently watched that TED Talk and it's so interesting, and it really kind of clicks in your mind when he explains it, how you should present your ideas and anything that you're trying to sell to someone or get them to see something the same way you do. I thought it was brilliant, but we will definitely have you back in the future to go over more of the pitch structure. I think that will be so helpful.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you so much, Charlie. This has been so helpful.
You're very welcome. I am happy to come back. I hope this has been interesting and that your listeners sort of relate to some of the things I've said here. And always happy for people to get in touch and contact me if they've got any questions.
If you've enjoyed this episode, then you can find out more about us by searching @HerOwnBoss Podcast on Instagram. And make sure to leave us a review and subscribe to hear the latest on finding your inner entrepreneur.